Okay, in the last section, we were introduced to the appearance panel and kind of the basic functionality making this star object. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to be focused on repetition and using several of the tools that Illustrator provides to allow us to easily repeat things and make a bunch of copies at once, which is a really powerful tool that draws on some of Illustrator's powers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a shape. So let's go ahead and we're going to start by just creating a line segment, right? It's going to be, really simple. So I just want to create one line segment. Now, my stroke is currently set to 15 and the color is set to this beautiful pink. To make it a little easier to see, I'm going to choose black, which should stand out against the black background pretty well. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the weight at 15 for now. And then I'm just going to go ahead and click on this and kind of center it in the screen. So I've got this object. I drew it at some angle. It doesn't really matter. You can set it wherever you want. And maybe we should just make it vertical. So I just set it to 90 degrees. And let's see the different types of ways we can repeat things. So the first tool we're going to be looking at, and these are newer tools that you used to have to do this manually, which was a joy. Or you'd have to have a script that you installed that did it for you. But they finally added these as functions that work really well. So if I go to the Object tab, there's a lot of things down here that we're going to slowly get into. We've already learned how to make clipping masks. We've already learned how to make compound paths. And something I want you to note is that with many of these things that we're going to be talking about in this menu, there is a make and a release option or an edit mask, right? So make is when you join the two objects together into this clipping mask group. Release is when you essentially set them free, right? You break the group apart. Notice the compound path, right? You can make a compound path, which is basically when you have two objects creating a compound path. So you could have like a square and a circle, and the circle's inset in the square, and then you make a compound path, and that disappears the fill in the circle, but it leaves you with a square outside and a circular hole. But you can also release that, right? They're essentially groups. And the same thing happens with the first thing we're going to look at, which is repeat, right? You'll notice there's this grayed out release, there's options, and there's three types of repeat. We're going to start with the top one, which is just radial. If I click on that, you'll see that what it's done is it's taken my object that I had selected and it's repeated it, right? In a circle, right? So it's a radial repeat. Now, there's several options that are available here based on these different symbols. And they're also available in that menu, and we'll look at those in a second. But to start with, the first tool that's really useful is this little dot here on the blue ring. This blue ring you'll notice that that's right about center on the line. That's where my center of rotation is for this object. And so that's what's going to determine how far these things are apart. But I can make this circle smaller. Notice that they go in and out, right? I can send them really far away. I'm going to go ahead and keep them somewhat close. I can also use this to rotate, right, the orientation of the entire set of clones. And then the other settings I want to show you are, first, there's these two little half circles here. What these do is they allow you to set like how many degrees of the circle is this repeat going to happen, right? So you don't have to do an entire circle. You can adjust that. And then there's this little handle here on the side of the box. And what that does is it allows you to increase or decrease the number of copies, right, that you are having made, right? So I can crank this way up, or crank it down. I can, have this, have these be at whatever distance I want them to be. Okay, so the other thing that I can do from this window with these tools is to double click on the object. And when I do that, any objects that I'm repeating, I am now in a state where I can edit them, right? So I could make these longer. I can come up here and say, oh, I don't want these to be uniform. I want them to have, a different width profile. And I could also say rotate these, right? So that I'm starting to get, you know, significantly different patterns emerging from the objects that I'm making, right? So I can, you know, create something like that. And then to get out of that, I just go off in space somewhere, double click, select the object again, and now I can come down, right? And I could make this, you know, significantly smaller, so these things overlap in, you know, interesting ways. I can, right, make this so that it's only partial. I could increase or decrease those number of clones like I've done previously. And now it looks like I have a crown of thorns or something like that. But, right, you can get this sense that you get the understanding that, right, there's a lot of opportunity in here to work with this. Now, the other thing is I don't need to just have a single object as what's being repeated. So if I double click and I come in here with, say, I'm just going to use my paintbrush tool, and I don't want to hover over it, and I want to make sure it has the asterisk so it's a new thing, and I want to just kind of do a squiggle, right? It's going to go ahead and copy all of those squiggles that I've just made in that one section, right? And if I was to say, oh, I really want to add, I don't know, a circle as well, I can come in here and I can, maybe I'm going to do just little yellow dots somewhere. So I can come in here and click and create another one, right? And now it's allowing me to create all of these. And you'll notice, right, depending on where I place them, they duplicate all the way around. So again, this is a really, really handy tool. And, you know, I was doing this once I created it with one object, but you can always, you know, you could always create, say, you know, a group of objects. I'm going to go ahead and give these strokes just so it's, because I know when if they get any smaller, they're going to look strange. But let's just do like a deep orange stroke on these and make it 4 pixels, right? But I could always take all of these objects. They don't even need to be a group. And I can just go to Object, Repeat, Radial, right? And they're going to all be repeated, you know, as they were aligned to one another previously. Okay, so what other options do I have, or what else can I get from the menu? So if I have this one that I just created selected, I can go to, if I go to Object and I go down to Repeat and I go down to Options, right, what's going to happen is, one thing I can do is reverse the overlap, right? So you'll notice that, right, in this case, they're all hiding under this object and overlapping in this object, and you'll see there's one place here where that's not true because it's the first copy, right? But I can just flip that so it goes the other direction. This one's tucked under, but now all of these other ones look like they're on top just because of the way they're arranged, right? I can also, again, adjust the number of copies here, so I could say 32 if I wanted to, you know, and I can also adjust the radius. So, okay. Now, so that's the radial version, right, where you can actually create really interesting stuff very quickly. Let's look at one of the other types. So one of the other types is called grid. So I'm going to go ahead and create this, and let's make these slightly, let's make this a different color. I'm just going to make this, I really don't like reds. I don't know why. Let's make this like a burgundy, or there we go. I don't know, something, just choose a color. It doesn't really matter. And then for the stroke, I'm going to go ahead and just make this a little deeper red for some reason. Okay. All right, so I've got this object. And no, I'm going to make this black because I really want this to stand out, at least initially. Okay, so I've just created an ellipsoid, right? And I'm happy with that, but let's go ahead and repeat it. So I'm going to go to Object, I'm going to go down to Repeat, Grid, and you'll see that, surprisingly enough, it repeats it in a grid. And if I want more copies, I can just pull this down, right? You'll notice that I'm sort of like exposing things, right? This is literally a clipping mask on this like endlessly repeating field of pink blobs. Now, much like the other tool, I can also, with this grid, I can also click up here to increase the space between these, or make it so that they're more tightly packed. right? I can also use this to make the columns more tightly packed. And you can see I can start to get, patterns that emerge from this. Again, if I double click and select this object, I can, make adjustments here, and all of the clones will have similar adjustments. You can see if I go up too high with this, I get, it just turns totally black because that stroke is overlapping itself until I get to about, somewhere in here. Right, so I'm going to leave this, offset a bit, but, there we are. What else can I do with this? So, so I can make more copies. Oh yeah, I can double click to get out of that and then select it again. The other thing I can do with a grid is I can scale it. And what it does is it actually shrinks down the size of the objects, right? So it's not shrinking the window so I only see fewer. It's actually shrinking how big this object appears on the screen, right? Okay, so those are the settings I can get to there. Let's go ahead and go to the object setting, the settings over here. So I can say repeat, options, and there's a couple more options here that I have that were not accessible in this view. One of those is the grid type. Note that this type of grid, they're all even. If I click on this type, it offsets them some. Now, let me go ahead and cancel this, and I'm going to right click. I don't think I can, nope, I have to do it up here. So I'm going to say object, and I'm actually going to say repeat and release. And then I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this back so it's at 0 degrees. And I'm actually going to make it more of a circle to start with, maybe. And maybe what we should do is let's go ahead and copy this object and do paste in front. So Command or Control C, Command or Control F. And then I'm going to rotate that copy. I'm going to hold down Shift when I do it so it snaps to 270. And I'm just going to bring this up like this. Now why I'm doing, and I'm going to hold down Shift so it's locked in a vertical position. And once I've done that, I'm going to select both of these, and then I'm going to go over to my Pathfinder, and I'm going to go ahead and click Unite. Now, so why did I do that to make this little shape? The reason I made this shape is because for this next grid option, it's going to make the most sense when the clones are have like a clearly defined vertical center line. So I've got this object selected. I'm going to go to Object. I'm going to go to Repeat, and I'm going to say Grid. All right, so I'm going to leave everything in the default state right now. Right, I'm just going to leave these set here, and I'm going to go back to my options, just because this is going to make life so much easier to see what's happening than what I previously had on screen. So now if I click this offset, you'll see that the top row is offset by 50% from the next row down. If I change that to this, they're going to be offset vertically. And if I flip the rows, I'm not seeing any change. And that's because these are uniform on either side. If there was some detail on this that was different, like let's say we hit cancel, I'm just going to double click on this, and once I've done that, let's go ahead and create a little circle. I'm going to hold down Shift and Option so that I can draw it right here. And then we talked about compound paths earlier, so let's go ahead and make one. Or actually, let's use one of these other Pathfinder modes. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to hit the letter V to use selection, hold down Shift, select this so I have both of these selected, and I'm going to say use this one, which is minus front. Which is essentially going to create a hole in this shape. So, so I've got this. I'm going to double click to get out of there. I'm going to select this whole object. I'm going to go down to Repeat and Options. And now if I say flip rows, you'll see that these rows are now mirrored from the row below. If I undo that and I say flip vertical, you'll see that it actually flips that row vertically. If I flip the columns, you'll see that the vertical columns flip, and vice versa, So I can get these all flipped around in different ways. And then, I prefer to scale things like this if I'm going to get stuff closer together or further apart, But so you can see how these things overlap, and then, how they overlap here. So this is another way that we can work to create multiples. I'm going to go back to my options one last time with this. And I am going to flip some of these things around. Let's see here. I actually really like some of these holes sticking through, but I just wanted to make sure things were a little bit cleaned up. And what I want to do is I'm going to hit OK. I really want these copies to be a bit more like this, right? So you can imagine they're sort of staircased up for what we're going to be working on next. So I've got this. I'm going to pull this down so it's out of the way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to have this copy selected. I'm going to hit Command C to copy, and I'm going to double click to get out of that entirely. I'm going to hit Command V to paste, and obviously Control C or V for you to copy and paste in Windows, because I want to use this one again with this mirror option. So I'm going to go back to Object. I'm going to go to Repeat and Mirror. And what this does is it basically gives me a line that I can mirror things around. Now let me close some of these windows so it's a little less hectic in here. And so I can use this to basically say, where should this mirroring happen, right? Maybe I want it to be mirrored this way, so there's some overlap. Maybe I want it to be further apart. This is a really useful way to say make eyes. But then the other thing I can do is if I click on one of these handles on the end, I can actually mirror these. And you know what's interesting is that these are mirrored in a way where, right, it's hiding the object that's underneath, and now I've made a heart, and isn't that adorable? Right, but so, you know, so there's all sorts of different ways that we can mirror this, and now it's a butterfly. Right, so there are, you know, several options in terms of how this mirroring happens. This center option here, right, it allows me to pull this in or out, but it also tells me where the center of rotation should be, right? Do I want this to rotate right around this edge? Do I want it to rotate maybe closer up to the tip of the little hat or whatever, spaceship or something, right? So that I can get this mirrored, you know, horizontally like this. And then from there, maybe I want to, right, shoot this in here, right? And so this isn't something that allows me to create, you know, a lot of multiples, but it does allow me to create, you know, to mirror this this singular object, and I can create some really nice symmetrical shapes out of that. Okay. I have no idea what this would be, but you know, it's exciting. Maybe if I double click on this and actually double click on this again and select this inner one, and maybe make this a little bit more like that. You know, I don't know what this is. It's something with a shiny surface on it. I could also always, you know, get rid of the stroke, but right. But so those are the ways. That's one. This is the repeat tool, right? So there's lots of options there. Now, one of the things with the repeat tool is, you know, you probably don't necessarily always want this to be in a box. Like it'd be great if, hold on, let me go ahead and pull this down a touch. If this top edge, and let me see if I can adjust this some. Okay, right, is if I didn't have these copies up here, if I just had like, you know, rows and rows of this stuff, and maybe I want this to actually be the full width of the, right, the window. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. But I want this to terminate somewhere, right? I'm going to go ahead and go beyond that a little bit. There we go, right? I want this to be filled all the way across the bottom, but I want this to be, you know, these edges to be lumpy. So what I need to do is, once I've got this set, if I come up here and I say Object, and I go down to Expand, what it's going to do is it's going to take all this work that I've done, and it's going to create an individual copy of each one of these objects, and it's going to turn it into a group rather than turning it into something else. Now, when I expand this, all I want to expand is the object, not the fill. So I'm going to uncheck fill. I'm going to hit OK. And once I've done that, nothing changes really at first. But if I click on layers and I flip this open, you'll see that this is now a clipping mask, right? It's no longer a a repeat, right? These are still radials, right? And there's nothing I can do to the objects inside of them, but this is a clipping mask. And so clipping masks, right, we can make and release. So let's go ahead and go up to Object, Clipping Mask, and we'll go down to Release, right? Which is also Option or Alt Command 7, which is, you know, Option or Alt Control 7 in Windows. But I click Release, and you'll see that I get a ton of different copies, right? It's basically, if these are visible on screen at all, any part of them, it's going to give me another copy of that, right? So I've released that clipping mask, and now I've got, you know, more copies than I really wanted. I only really wanted those bottom 3 rows. So let's go ahead and we can, but now that we've released that, this is still a group. So I'm going to have to double click to get in here. And then if I just click and drag, right, I can select all those objects on the top 2 rows and just delete them. And then I have these bottom 3 rows, and if I double click outside, I can now select this as a group, right? And I can move this up or align it wherever I want, but now I've got that nice ridged top to these. And with this, let's go ahead and do something to the appearance of these objects. Now, I've got them all selected as a group, and honestly, it would have been a better idea to do this before I did all these steps. So I'm going to hold off on that. We're just going to leave these as flat colored objects for the time being, right? Okay, so I've got all of these objects set. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and look at other ways we can repeat things. And we're just going to keep building from these objects that we've got. So yeah, so you can start creating a scene out of whatever shapes, objects you want to make. I'm going to pull some of this up and out of the way and pull this down as well. Right, we've done, oops, and it looks like that clipping mask or something is still there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we don't need it. Okay, so I've got these things all spread throughout, but I want to show you one other way we can repeat things. And it's a really cool tool that allows you to do a lot of interesting things. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by creating a rectangle. Pretty exciting, I know. And we're going to make it pink. And then we're going to just go ahead and have this turn into an ellipse. And this is going to be like the most basic transformation that's going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the ellipse. We're going to select the square. We're going to go to Object. And we're going to come down to this thing called Blend. And what Blend does, first we're going to look at what it does by clicking on it. What Blend does is it, through a certain number of steps, it allows you to take one piece of geometry and have it morph into another form. Right? Now this could be, this could be just like a square that turns into a really skinny rectangle, right? But in this case, we're actually having this transition into a circle. Now, once I've got this set, if I go to Object and Blend Options, there's several different choices. Right now, it's set to, the spacing is set to smooth color. Now, these colors are identical, so it doesn't really matter, but that does give us a hint as to some of the things that this can do. Let's go ahead and just do specified steps, because this kind of shows a bit more what's happening. So first, you'll see the orientation. There's 2 options here, and align to page means that, right, if this line is rounded, which I'll show you how to do in a second, you know, they're all still going to be vertically aligned to the page, but if we click on this other option, then they will be perpendicular to the path. So right now the set of steps specified is 2, right? It's 1, 2 copies. Let's go ahead and make this 10 and hit OK. All right, so now I've got 10 copies and I get a much smoother transition through this. Now, right, this blend doesn't just do the geometry, but it also blends the stroke and it blends the color. So, and other appearance options. So if I double click on this, right, if I select this and then double click, right, this acts like a group, right? So I actually have three items that become part of this blend. There's the path, or sorry, there's the objects that start and end the path. And then if I hover in just the right spot where this turns into a dot, there is also a path that shows up between those 2 points, right? And the path determines, right, you know, in this case, it's the shortest distance between these two objects. Let's go ahead and select our square, and we're going to start by modifying things here. So first, I'm going to go ahead and set the stroke weight to something huge, let's say 20, because I want you to note that, right, it starts out at 20, and with each step, it slowly gets thinner and thinner and thinner as it gets here. Now let's change the color. So we have this set to pink. Why don't we just set this to cyan? Right, so now you can see that that blend means that at every step, right, this cyan slowly makes its way to pink. And, you know, if I don't have a stroke set on one object, right, it essentially treats it as a stroke of 0, and so it'll move from whatever the stroke width is here to nothing. Right? If you take the stroke off both sides, you can get these really, and this is where smooth color comes in. I'm just going to turn the stroke off, right? And let's go ahead and select our whole blend again, and let's go to Object and Blend Options, and let's change this from specified steps to smooth color, right? So now smooth color is going to take however many steps it takes to make this a really nice smooth transition. This is a pretty cool way to do, gradients and other things. There's other reasons why you would do a gradient this way, but that's just something to note. Also with these, I'm going to go ahead and go back to specified steps. So specified distance, right, just means that it's going to create, a new step every, in this case, it's 4 pixels. If I did, 25 pixels or something like that and hit tab and maybe switched another setting, there we go, it'll update, right? And so now you can see the ridges in there, right, between those different steps. I'm going to go to specified steps though, because I don't want you to have a ton of copies on here and have it just make your systems lag if it can't handle it. Okay, so I've got these. So now how do I modify this path between them, right? Let's double click, and let's say, right, one thing I can do is I can just drag this around the scene wherever I want, and I can get, it's interesting that it does that twitchiness when I get close to it here, but, right, so I can drag this around the scene wherever I need it to be. I can also rotate these objects, if I hover over the corner, right, and so you can see how it rotates the objects there. Now with the circle, I'm not sure if rotating it, yeah, it does a little bit of twisting as well. But you can see it snaps back at some point, right? It's not going to twist and twist and twist and twist. It's just going to do a little bit of twisting as it goes. So how do I modify that path that's between them? To modify the path, I can either use the curvature tool or the pen tool to add points and add curve. So if I come in here with the curvature tool and click, right, I can start to bend this path, and I can make this, make a really interesting, right, transition between these objects, right? And so this is a really fun way to create multiple copies and to create a path for those copies to be followed along, right? And right, so I can stretch this out so that there's, right, more distance between these shapes. There's lots of ways you can work with this. There's no need for you to only have 2 shapes as part of this. If I was to go ahead and create a star and click and drag over here, you'll see that right now I've got right, the star object at the end of my path. And if I double click, where is my star? There we go. The star has no fill, so that's why, right, the colors were not changing. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to yellow or something. Right, and so I can have multiple shapes, and so it can transition all the way through. The other thing that you can do is if I go to Object, again, up at the top, and I go to Blend, and go down to my Blend Options, right, I said we can align to path. Right, so now you can see these rotate through this transition, right? If I switch this back, they're more or less aligned in the exact same orientation as this copy is. And if I switch this, then they slowly rotate as it goes through that curve. And I can hit OK. And then the final thing is underneath, you might have also noticed there's a couple more options down here. There's reverse spine and there's reverse front to back. So reverse spine basically means that it's going to flip the objects in order, right? So this is where the square was. Now the star's here, the circle's here, and right, this is over here. I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to go to the other option. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to blend, and I'm going to say reverse front to back. And what that does is it basically says this should be the top object, right? And now these look like they're going back into space. I feel like that's pretty clear. Now there's one other thing that was grayed out as an option. And if I click on here and I go to blend, you'll see it's replace spine. So replace spine means that I can actually come in here and let's say I wanted to, maybe I should just make a new object that's simple. Let's just say I wanted to have these go around a polygon. Oops, apparently I'm in the object, so let me double click and get out of it. And let's go ahead and create a hexagon here. And now what I need to do is I need to have that hexagon selected. I need to hold down Shift and select the entire blend. And now I should be able to go down and say replace spine. And when I do that, that's going to take and it's going to wrap these shapes around the outside, around whatever spine I put on there, right? So whatever path I've created, it will do that. So if I was to come in and, use my paintbrush tool and do a freeform stroke and then select this and go to object, blend, right, replace spine. Now, right, I've been able to apply those to that stroke that I made. So, right, this is a really powerful tool in terms of replication and duplication and subtle modifications that take place over time. The final thing that you can do is within the blend settings here, there's also this option for expand. And what that does is it basically creates a new object in your scene for every copy that you've currently got in your object. And you won't be able to manipulate it the same way anymore, right? They're essentially static copies of unique objects. Yeah, so this is another way that we can work with multiples and use some of the power of Illustrator to make multiple copies. Okay, so what I would like you all to do is to just spend some time creating a scene using these different things and experimenting with what happens when you work with appearance as well.